So let's take a look at the next slide and talk a little bit about staffing, backlog, and turnaround time. Okay, and this is a tough one because once you get behind, it kind of feels like you're on a treadmill and you can never catch up, right? And the downstream implications of that are things that we're all familiar with. It includes increased overtime and more utilization of contractors. It includes increased turnaround time, decreased cash flow and revenue. And a lot of times accuracy ends up suffering because we might end up having to leverage coders that maybe don't necessarily specialize in a specific type of coding that we need. And so to address and to prevent these downstream impacts, we're going to turn to our expert, Kimberly McKenney, Senior Director of CDI and Coding Operations at Conifer. So Kimberly, give us a feel here. What are some of the best strategies for addressing staffing, backlog, and turnaround time?
Yeah, well, I think if we move to the next slide, we have several items listed there. I know at first blush, a lot of them may seem very intuitive, but I think it comes down to really being able to implement and make them operational. So the first step is really to get an accurate accounting of the number of FTEs that you need to complete your coding. So obviously know what your incoming volumes are, and you can back into those FTEs. But what I really recommend taking a look at is the number of working hours you're utilizing in your formula to calculate the number of FTEs that you need. So historically, I've always used a 7-hour workday. So in my formula, I may plug in 8 hours, and then I multiply that by 0.875. So that brings me down to 7 hours, which accounts for their 2 15-minute breaks, plus an additional 30 minutes throughout the day, just to kind of account for, if they need to get up and stretch or grab more water, or they have an account that's particularly difficult, that's maybe taking them a little more time. However, I will say in my last few years since joining the vendor side of the world, I've encountered different labor laws and different company policies. So at my previous employer, all of us actually had to use all of our PTO except for 40 hours. That was all we could carry over. Here in my current role, it varies by state. So some coders can carry their time over, and some coders have to utilize everything that they accrue, or they actually lose it. So since then, I've actually drastically reduced that 2,080 hours to account for all that additional time I know they won't be working, then multiplying it by that 0.875. So that's really, giving me a good count of the actual coders that I will need. Then, obviously, kind of in that same vein, you want to effectively manage your staff's PTO, especially in that use it or lose it environment, to avoid things like everybody wanting the last couple of weeks of the year off. Additionally, we also offer perks like training and bonus programs. Those are a great strategy. Training in the same specialty or in different specialties that can really help keep your uncoded volumes, level, and avoiding peaks and valleys there. And finally, I think ensuring that you are engaging your staff. We provide webinars to our team members on a monthly basis that actually also lets them accumulate all of their continuing education credits. And our coding compliance team will conduct Q&A sessions after those sessions for any questions they may have. Another very important strategy that I think works really well in engaging your team members is having one-on-ones with your indirect reports. So I meet on a quarterly basis with all of the coders. I scheduled them for 30 minutes. They don't always last that long. In fact, they often only last a few minutes, but building those relationships just really goes a long way. So in those follow-up conversations, I can ask things like, how's your new house, or how are your daughter's competitions going? And that just really, goes a long way with engaging your team members. I think it also helps for them to not have, an oh my gosh reaction if they see my number pop up on their phone if I have to reach out to them for some reason. If we move to the next slide, I can kind of touch base on kind of a real world example of how putting all of these strategies into place has has really helped. So, walked into a situation where, our department was in need of, reevaluation of staffing levels. Overtime was constantly being used. We utilized over close to $200,000 in overtime. So, evaluated what our volumes were, calculated what staffing I needed, using those tactics I talked about, really taking into account all the PTO and the holidays and the vacation time that would be used. Completed cross training of our coders in the same specialty amongst different clients, cross training amongst different specialties. That really led to consistent coverage, allowed us to be able to cover any unplanned absences. The following year, our overtime was cut in half, which was still $100,000 and a really big number. But so far this year, I mean, we're closing, we're in September, obviously, and we've only spent about $3,000 in overtime to date.
Before we jump to the next slide, Kimberly, what was the factor that you multiplied by, instead of assuming they're going to be able to work every single day, every day of the year, what was the factors you used to give you that wiggle room?
0.875, so 87.5%.
Gotcha. All right, great.